Welcome to Powered by Instinct, a podcast for professionals who think about how your fundamental nature drives performance. In each episode, Kolbe experts will interview top performers, team leaders, consultants, and coaches to discuss identifying team members' strengths, aligning those strengths with their jobs, and optimizing individual and team performance. If you're interested in getting more done more naturally, then let's jump in.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Powered by Instinct. We are very happy to have here with us today Clare Willson, who has a long and varied history with Kolbe, which we'll get into a little bit. Her role now professionally and her use of Kolbe, because as you'll hear, it's not just professional uses of Kolbe with Clare, but she's at Riff Creative. And Clare, why don't you tell people what your job title is? And really more importantly, because at Kolbe, we're not as big on job titles as much as what the heck do you do?
Well, I guess my official job title is a team strategist, which means a lot, but probably mainly, I guess it's that I coach. And what I do is I use the Kolbe and I coach our teammates. And we also offer coaching as a service to our clients. And so, yeah, in a nutshell, I would say I'm a coach.
You have a longevity with Kolbe that few people can match. So tell people, were you first exposed to Kolbe?
Well, I feel really lucky. I was exposed to Kolbe way back in high school in 92. So that's 30 years ago. I was a sophomore in high school. Brett Laux was my teacher. I had the good fortune of having him as a teacher. And we were a school within a school inside of a large public school. And it was kind of a pilot program for outcome project based learning. And so we're a small school within a school. We all took the Kolbe, and I remember sitting down with Brett and having him go over my results. And things made sense to me in a way that they never had before. I had always been a good student. I loved school. I loved learning, but I never understood why I struggled in certain ways before. And the Kolbe, seeing my result, helped me understand why that was.
So tell people what your result is.
I'm a 9234, which means that I need a lot of details. I'm going to start with a tremendous amount of detail. I'm very thorough, I'm very precise, and I do a deep, deep dive into information. And then I keep going deeper. And then after a while, I come up for a little air. And then I accommodate with my implementer, which means I need to kind of bridge the gap between what's imagined and what's real. And so, what that looks like for me is that I need to move my body around, I need to move things around and kind of make something real to show or demonstrate or make a prop or kind of find a way to have a physicality show what I've learned. And then half of my talents is what I don't do. I don't make the plan and I don't come up with the brainstorming or the big picture.
So going back to when you learned this about yourself, do you remember which part of that was like you connected with most, that was the biggest either aha or changed? You were talking about the way it changed your relationship with school. What about it?
So it was the follow through piece for sure. And distinctly, I remember having struggles with outlining. And I remember it was like, here's the plan for writing your paper. And, it seems, okay, there's the plan, just follow the plan. But when we get to the part where we had to outline every time, I would just become completely confused. And I just remember thinking, how can I write an outline before I have written my paper? Like it literally made no sense to me at all. And David, I know you also have a two and follow through. So I
Yeah.
know we have a lot in common.
Yeah.
And I remember Brett saying to me, You don't have to do that. You can just make it up. You can write an outline, you can write whatever you want, and you can go back and fix it at the end. No one's looking." And to me, that was a huge permission slip. And it really helped me understand why I don't naturally follow the plans, why I naturally would notice the loopholes and take that route. And I actually struggled with thinking that it meant I was lazy or I wasn't responsible or I didn't care about school. I had kind of an affective overlay, a lot of judgments on that follow through talent and understanding that to be able to counteract follow through is actually a big strength and to see it in that way. And it's something I still deal with. It's still something that I work on. But I remember that moment with Brett thinking, okay, there's nothing actually wrong with me. Or if there's something wrong with me, like
Right.
this isn't the thing that's wrong with me.
Yeah. So that was your introduction to Kolbe. When you started using Kolbe, other than just for yourself, and I'm sure that was a progression in school and then in other ways, but when you started using it with other people, what what were the first ways you started using it with other people? And that doesn't have to be like in your paid professional context, if that wasn't it, but what was it?
Well, my dad was in strategic coach. And so after I had taken the Kolbe, he had also taken Kolbe. So he was indexed. My mom was
Coincidentally, I'm assuming.
coincidentally, yeah, it was actually, I had taken it several years before he had joined coach. So that was kind of interesting. So yeah, he took it. My mom took it, my sister, my brother, later on, their spouses, all of our kids. And so, yeah, how we use it outside of my professional life is daily. With my son as well, I have a 10-year-old. And so it's really baked into how we interact with each other literally on a daily basis.
So you mentioned your son and using it with the kind of others, and you've been a school teacher. So I guess by way of additional introduction for you, you're a Colby certified consultant. You're also a Colby youth specialist. You've done that training to, so that you understand how conative strengths are kind of how they're shown and how they come out with kids, and then also how to guide kids and sometimes, frankly, guide the adults in kids' lives to understand how this works. So tell me about your experience with that, and maybe start with your son and share whatever you are comfortable. And obviously, you don't have to share everything, but I know that it's something that you've used as a parent.
It is. So my son, Henry, he's a 4.297. And so we are very different in many ways, and we are very similar in a very key way around our follow through. And so with my son, he's really gotten to know Colby in a way that I never really thought I would teach him. And when school was canceled in the spring of 2020, everything came home, there were packets coming home. He goes to a great school. It's a great fit for him. It's a Montessori school. I actually used to teach there. So these packets would come home and it created a lot of stress for us. And that seemed to be a good opportunity to point out to him, okay, we're given a lot of information from your teacher, but the point is really about the learning. And what we need to do is we need to help you understand how are you going to learn this information in a way that works for you? Because, the classroom situation, that's out now. Now we're doing this together at home.
Yeah.
And so it came to a point too where I basically said to the teacher, if we were to set this packet on fire and you never saw it again, what would happen? She's like, it's no problem. So he kind of got I got a big permission slip from Brett saying, you don't have to outline. He got this big permission slip from his teacher that basically said, these packets, it's a way for parents who don't happen to be teachers to help get you some information, but you can trust your mom and you can trust yourself. And this is really a time to figure out what you're interested in and kind of take ownership in your learning in a brand new way. And so we just pivoted and looked at basically, I kind of came up with my own curriculum, and it was basically around what is your MO and how are you successful? And so it was everything. It was how do we do school? How do we do our routines? How do we do meals? How do we do your chores? How do we set up the physical environment? Every day, kind of his lesson was about centered on his Colby.
So was that different than when you were a teacher? And how much, if at all, did you use Colby when you were a teacher?
So when I was a teacher, I didn't have the opportunity to use it widespread with entire classes. So it was
Mhm.
completely different in that because we knew his MO, I could really involve him in, okay, this is the result. This is what we want to do. How are we going to get there?
Mhm.
And then have him understand, well, how do I get there? Well, as a 4.297, I need to take a lot of risk. I need a lot of change. I need a lot of physicality to this. And most of the time, he needed to be moving and outside. And so we just really were able to tailor an experience for him that was really hands on and got him to understand and make the connections. So, for example, he goes to Montessori school. Teachers write in cursive. You have to be able to read cursive. You have to be able to write in cursive. And so it was kind of a struggle for him. And so we got a big sand tray. We tried practicing, writing in the sand. He would trace it in the dirt, anything to kind of, he would roll it out and make it out of Play Doh, just anything to really engage that tactile sense, not an idea, but like physically, how am I approaching this? How am I solving this problem?
So in a general way, do you have thoughts on, so not just specific to one kid or one particular set of Colby results, but how can a parent and maybe a teacher as well take a general understanding of conation and conative strengths and apply that to being a parent, being a teacher with all kinds of different kids? Is there a different approach that you take because you understand this third part of the mind, conative, and you know there are kids with all different strengths in a classroom or in a family if you have multiple kids?
Yeah, I do have the advantage of knowing conation very well, but you don't have to be an expert to be able to approach your kids this way. I think it does start with understanding that the conative is a separate special part of the mind that it's a real gift, and there's a pattern that is predictable and that exists with not only with you but with each of your children. And if you can find a way to work with that, understand it, and dial in and play to those strengths, you don't have to be an expert and know all the nuance to do that. You just have to kind of start out and learn as you go and be really
Yeah.
curious.
So with you and your son, you mentioned you're a lot alike in some ways. You're very different. Let's take quick start. How does that come out and how do you deal with those differences, or do you not even see it as deal with them? They just are what they are. I guess what's your approach to that? And what's your experience been?
So we have high conflict with quick start for sure. And yeah, I mean, we do definitely deal with it. But I think at the base, we really have a deep respect and love for each other and for each other's strengths and talents. And I think if you can start there and have a lot of humor, you can really go a long way. So with my fact finder, for example, I will flood him out all the time. And I know this. And, I can turn it into kind of a parenting thing about like, well, if I'm talking, you need to always be listening. Early on, I realized that's not going to ever work for this child. And so I literally would coach him and tell him, this is how mom's wired. I get so excited and energized. I want all the details. I want all the questions. And that can feel, and he's like, it feels really overwhelming. It feels like too much. And I was like, okay, I hear
Well,
ya.
yeah, so what do you do for yourself as a parent to, because you are who you are,
I am who
but that's maybe not necessarily the way he needs to communicate. How do you keep that in check?
So I just told him, I said, when you feel that feeling of the overwhelm or the too much or my energy's coming on real strong, exactly. That is me. I'm not really going to change that, but I'd like to know when that's happening. And so I literally, when he was about, I guess about 3 years ago, I taught him to like put up a stop sign. I said, if you put it up real strong, it's going to hurt my feelings. Not going to like that. But if you were feeling flooded out, just put up your hand. Just kind of give me a gentle stop sign, maybe kind of smile a little bit. And we practiced it and it felt kind of, felt kind of weird at first, but I mean, we still use it to this day. And it's just like a little, I am who I am, but it's just a gentle reminder that he's also who he is. And, a family is also, it's just another type of team. And I want to have the best teamwork with everybody that's in my life, including my child.
Yeah. So how long ago did you get Colby certified?
2003.
So you had known Colby for a while before that. What prompted you to want to go that next step and get the additional training?
It literally didn't even feel like a decision. I think that's my fact finder, just striving. It was like, "Oh, there's a training, I'll take it. Yes, yes, please." It just seemed like such a home run because I'm a mom, because I, was a teacher or am a teacher. I've got so many special kids in my life. I want to do everything that I can to really fully understand how to bring the best out of my kid.
And so how do you use that now in your coaching practice? Tell me more about what you do and how you bring the Colby piece in.
So, in my coaching practice, I do work with a lot of startups, founders, their teams, community groups, boards, but I've also started working with parents, which has been really great. So, even though I'm not in the classroom anymore, I have had the opportunity to work with children again. And so, bringing that kind of that whole picture of it's the missing piece to the parents who, you know, are similar to my child and I, which is very different. And what are literally small things that you can do and put in place that can really help you understand the gifts of your child and lean into those rather than just kind of continually hit your head against the wall for things that you shouldn't change about yourself.
Are there consistent things parents ask for help on, or is it kind of all over the map?
I think biggest is routines. Like, how do we get out the door in the morning? How do we get to bed at night? How do we deal with homework? How do we deal with chores? Those are probably the four biggest ones.
Any consistent themes, or is that much more focused on that kid's Colby result?
I would say the coaching is definitely really tailored to that child's Kolbe results. And often it is where a parent and child are very different, maybe around the need for structure. And then how do you navigate that when you are dealing with something like a routine?
So, how much of your coaching practice would you say is with kids and families, and how much is with kind of a more traditional professional coaching or adult coaching kind of stuff?
I would say it's probably 20% parents and families now. David, it actually kills me that I don't have that exact detail for you.
Yeah, 9 in Fact Finder. You want to tell me exactly? 20% is close enough. We're just
I'm going to say
I'm trying
20%.
to give people a sense. Yeah, it's somewhere in that neighborhood. You can get back to us, Claire, if you want to do the research and tell us more precisely. I get it. Yes, I'm an 8 in Fact Finder. I should remind people I didn't start out with my own Kolbe results, but I feel your pain. What are the similarities, like when you work with kids and parents versus working with professional people?
Well, similarities would be everyone has a sense of how they can be successful when they're free to be themselves. Everybody knows what that feels like. Everybody knows what it feels like when, no matter how hard they try or how much they know, they cannot get something done. And so I think that where the difference is the application of, are we more focused on the family life and kind of nurturing, the children around us, or is it more in a team setting where you have a lot of adults who are kind of managing other things? But deep down, the principle is really the same. And it is, how can we help people understand how to be more free to be themselves so that they can really show up in a way where they can make their highest and best contribution?
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, I'm intrigued at the evolution within, as you were describing it, the parent company, LSW Architects, and then now Riff Creative. So you started with LSW and working using Kolbe, I think internally, is that correct? Mostly just inside the firm.
That's correct.
And then, so now you've got this separate entity that does the Kolbe work and works not just internally, but also with clients and outsiders. What was that evolution like? I mean, when did you guys decide we should do this with other people, not just ourselves?
Right. We did it. So I was just internal for our own teams. And then what happened was our principals really saw a need for not just how do we support the architects and the design team, but oh, what would it be like if we started indexing our consultants? What would it be like if we started indexing our contractors? What if we started indexing our owners? And so really taking the idea of a design team and really kind of not just the actual design team, but branching it out to who are all the stakeholders in the design process. The design process is it's a really collaborative process. And the life of a building, it goes through many phases from the project launch all the way through, design development, through construction administration. There's so many changes. And so what we started doing is I started working with the project team as it would change throughout the life of the project. New people would come in, we'd do a little mini launch, help them understand what is now the team dynamic when we, gain this person or not this person. So from that and just kind of seeing the magic of, oh, wow, we are having less conflict. We are having more fun. It's making a lot of financial sense when you can really lean into your strengths and understand this about not just your own team, but the whole project team. It was just kind of a natural progression to, well, if this is working for our own design teams, well, who else might it work for that
Right.
we're working with?
And how often are people resistant when you say, hey, you're part of this broadly constructed design team, not internal to us? We want you to take this test. Do they push back? Are they excited about it? What's your experience been?
I think we're really lucky. We have really great clients, really great consultants, owners. I think I can think of 2 times where someone has really been skeptical or really, you know, been like, "Okay, yeah, okay, another personality test, great. I already took one just like this," which, is hilarious
Yeah.
because there's nothing like this. But those people, I find sometimes it's the biggest critic once there's no denying what you can learn about yourself when you know your MO. So when I do have the rare person that's really resistant, I do see it as an opportunity because usually it's those people that have so much doubt about it. But then once they see for what it is, you just can't deny that it's true and that it can help you and it can help those around you.
Yeah, one of the reason I ask is, I mean, like you, we see some people be resistant and maybe push back, but most of the time they don't. But I know that a lot of times people hesitate to even ask other people to do it because they're expecting that pushback,
Mm.
that hesitation from others. But what we've seen is it doesn't happen that much. And when you explain to them, no, but this is all positive. You can't get a bad score, so you don't need to worry about being compared to somebody else or being given homework like, oh, you got a bad score, so you need to fix this and that and the other thing. They get past it even if they are resistant. And as you're saying, a lot of times they then become the biggest advocates because they were skeptical and they can tell that story of, yeah, I wasn't really sure this was going to help either, but it really did. And I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, those are often the most rewarding engagements because it is somebody who, and maybe you had a bad attitude about them too, because they weren't open and welcome and receptive to it, but then they do it. And sometimes I think one of the reasons they were resistant is because there was something internal, like you were describing when you were a kid and you got the result, and it was a sense of being given permission and freedom. A lot of adults sometimes internalize that there's something wrong with me, and they're a little worried sometimes, even though I tell them there's no right or wrong. That's not the message they've gotten. So they're a little hesitant, like, yeah, you tell me there's no right or wrong, but I've been taught to feel that this is bad. So if somebody shines a light on it, it's not going to be so great. But then they realize that light that gets shown isn't to put them down or to tell them there's a problem. There's this great part of you that you haven't been tapping into and we want you to. So I don't know. You didn't ask me. That was kind of my experience. I'm always curious to hear if other people see some of that too.
Yes, it is rare, but when it does happen, I have learned that it is actually a real opportunity. And I'm thinking now, a specific person who did come around. We kind of even joked afterwards, like, here's the good news is that you didn't have to really believe it for it to help us help you in the team. So
Yeah.
that's another thing too. It's that people, they don't have to believe it to be supported by those of us who use Kolbe.
Yeah. That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. So you've been not just exposed to, but using Colby for a long time. What keeps you engaged?
There's always something more to learn. A couple of years ago, Kathy started doing these deep dive retreats, and I started attending those. Those were really transformative and helped me understand even more about what I don't understand about the theory and how and just what all the applications are. I mean, I think there's a moment when people get their initial MO and they have kind of an insight, an immediate knowing of, okay, yeah, this is true. And maybe here's some kind of big highlights. And, usually it's focused on our longest lines. But, understanding that we're so much more than our longest lines, we're also our counteractions, our strengths. And I think that is a harder thing to understand right off the bat than how we strive.
Hmm.
So, yeah, there's the counteractions, how the patterns of how everything works together. And there's so it just cracks me up like there's no mastering the Colby. There's always more to learn and teamwork is so dynamic and family life is so dynamic. There's always going to be nuance based on who's in front of you and based on
Hmm.
the situation that's there and based on what you learned from it last time. So, yes, and it's probably a lot of that nine fact finder as well is that it's just really captured my attention. And I'm so curious about what there's still to learn that I don't even know that is out there.
I'm curious to know. So you've known Colby for a long time, but not everybody does, obviously, still, and not everybody in your life has always known it. Can you think back on times where people were giving you advice that was very well intentioned, but it just wasn't great advice for you because it was maybe tailored for somebody else's cognitive strengths? And what was that like?
Oh, yes. So many examples. Pretty much anything about organization, time management, anything about that will not work for me. With sorting and like I've heard a piece of advice on like sorting your paperwork. It's like touch it only once. Like I have no idea what that means. How would I know what to do with like what? Okay, for me, there's always going to be this, follow through need to, not working in order, working one way, working linearly. Like that doesn't work at first for me. I can't just make a decision with this piece of paper, touch it once. Like I don't know what to do with it. If I'm touching the paper, it's because I need to make a decision. And the way I make the decision is through trial and error and through a lot of shuffling around and reshuffling and kind of figuring it out as I go. So that is a piece of advice that I've heard that is terrible. Zero inbox for me is terrible advice. This might surprise you. I do consider a zero inbox if I have 20 or less. I feel like a total success because I can see it all on one screen. And then on
I
Fridays,
don't even remember those days, so I definitely view that as a success for you.
and I usually clear those out but if I have less than 20, that's a total win. But email organization, so anything where you have to have separate folders, or especially if they're digital folders that they're nested somehow, you might as well just hit the delete button. I don't see it. I don't see it. Anything with filing systems, I use notebooks or folders. They're colorful, but they're not color coded. My system changes all the time, but it still works for me. But if you put it in a file cabinet, I think it might have been Stephanie Clerget say once, you might as well set it on fire. Somebody really smart said, you might as well just set it on fire because it's gone. It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So those are a few.
Yeah, it's the reason I ask is because it's one of my pet peeves isn't quite right, because I don't get frustrated or annoyed with people who are like sincerely trying to help other people and giving them the advice that worked for them, but it's just a frustration for me to see so many of the people that we work with who learn the lesson that you learned when you were pretty young, but they're learning it so much later and they didn't know to ignore some stuff that people told them. Again, well-meaning stuff. And they could have avoided a lot of frustration, sometimes pain. I mean, of sometimes the guilt of, well, I was told this is what I should do and I'm not doing it, so there's something wrong with me. Or, the pain of, I didn't achieve what I wanted to because you weren't getting great advice in terms of what works best for you. It's not really your fault. You were working really hard to do it in a way that somebody you respected and somebody who's smart and successful told you to. But I don't know, do you think that because you learned about Kolbe so young relative to most people, that helped you avoid some of those things? Or did you still need to learn most of that the hard way? Kind of being told the bad advice, trying to follow it and realizing it's not for you.
Yeah, I wish I could say I learned it at 16, and David, I have felt so good about my follow through ever since. It's still at times a struggle because there's so much just cultural input. Especially, eh, I think Kathy calls the adapt talent the most demoralized of all of the talents, and especially in our country. And that all stuck with me because it is true. There's a lot of unlearning that I've had to do and continue to do around feeling bad that I'm simply not structured or, as organized as, as you're supposed to be. But what I think might surprise some people is that if you were to look in my closet or my fridge or, look at the way you would say, this is a very organized person because I do have I know where everything is, but the systems that I use are so simple. And my son and I joke about this all the time. We say, we do have a lot of systems, but they're so simple, even we will follow them. And so I think sometimes people with our follow through talent get a bad rap for many reasons, but just because something looks maybe random or chaotic doesn't mean there's not a system in place. But what
Yeah.
it might mean is it's areas of my life that I would consider to be very organized or appear very organized. It probably took years and 10 to 20 systems that failed. So this is something I do with my son a lot. I try to have a real sense of humor about it and say, okay, the system for us is the thing that we are actually going to do. And so we're going to start with something and we're going to just keep flexing it, keep taking away the steps until we're getting the result that we want in a way that's really easy for us.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you view organization and the follow through talent in that way, but
Well, I love the way you're describing it with your son, of doing a system that you'll actually do rather than some more comprehensive, involved system that maybe is great for somebody else, but it's not good for you guys because it's just not realistic. I think that's great. And I hadn't thought of it this way before, but your description of you're organized sometimes, but your systems are so simple that they're easy to follow. And it kind of made me realize, yeah, it's not much of a system to just alphabetize something or put it in chronological order from, oldest to newest. Sure, it's a system, but yeah, it's not much. And even with that, like, so I think about, well, I still have them, but my old records, and then, like music records, not business records kind of thing. I wanted to be able to find the record that I wanted to play. So I was really pretty good, but it was just alphabetized by artists. Like, that's not that hard to figure out. But even with that, I still wouldn't follow it like a 7, 8, 9 in Follow-Thru would do all the time. I'd go in waves, I'd listen to stuff, and then I would always have my pile of records that I've recently listened to that I haven't put back where they're supposed to go. And then it would eventually get, that stack would be big enough, and I'd be frustrated because I couldn't find what I was looking for. And I would just take 20 minutes and I'd refile everything. But again, super easy. It's not like somebody who would do a system around, well, what genre of artist? And, can't even imagine what all the different ways you could do it are. And those would also be a little complicated. So to me, what's the point? It's not a helpful system. But you and I are alike. We would say, we don't need that super complicated, helpful one, even though maybe in some respects it's more helpful. It's not more helpful for us. But what other thoughts do you have? I think particularly around kind of kids, parenting, families. We've covered lots of it, but I'm just curious. And the reason I say particularly that, because most of the people we have on the podcast are business applications. So you're a little unusual in the sense that, sure, you've done the business stuff, but you've also had these other applications. Any kind of words of wisdom to leave us with? How has it helped you? Like, if you were to say, just bottom line, this is the big difference that it's made for my family, what are some of those things?
Bottom line, the biggest difference that it's made for my family is that understanding my son's Kolbe, it lets me see him for who he is. It lets me see him for the talents that he can bring into this world. It really helps me understand how to spend my energy as a parent. There are just some things that will never work with him. And so I can safely and just, certain strategies work beautifully with other, they won't work with him. So I can spend zero energy ever trying to feel bad about something that I have an expectation on that simply won't work for him. That's really freeing.
Yeah. Well, I love the way you're saying that, because that's almost a restatement of why we're in business. Our mission, to help people understand what's great about themselves so they can tap into that and achieve the things they care about. So yeah, we do most of that in a business context, but it's so important to do early on, and families are probably the most effective way to make that happen. But I also love how you've learned so much, even though you've known about Kolbe so long. Watching your son and learning the way he does things and having to think about that dynamic has also helped you learn to figure out not just yourself, but how to also be not just a parent, but a coach with other people too.
Right. And if you are already using this for your business, then you know that it works and you know the power of it. And so, maybe it's just a question of maybe people just not stopping to think and say, oh, I could actually have a big
Yeah.
transformation like this in my family life as well. Well, you absolutely can. I mean, especially
Yep.
if you're using it for business, you already know it works.
Yep.
Imagine what it would be like to have this kind of teamwork with inside your own family. So
Well, thank you for taking the time and being on the podcast. Really appreciate it. And thanks for all the work you do with your business clients, with your family clients, within your own family. Really appreciate it. So thanks, Claire.
you are so welcome, David. Thank you.
And everybody else, thanks for tuning in. And we look forward to seeing you again when we have our next podcast. Bye.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Powered by Instinct. This show is brought to you by Kolbe Corp, a company that helps leaders and organizations thrive using the only instinctive strengths assessment on the market. If you enjoyed this episode, then follow Powered by Instinct wherever you get your favorite podcasts, or join us online at kolbe.com/podcast for all the latest episodes.